The Atlantic doesn't need to explode to become a threat. It only has to shift, quietly, slowly, just enough to break the balance. And when that balance starts to fail, winter stops feeling normal. It starts feeling like a warning. Scientists have been watching one system for years, a current that helps steady the climate itself. If that system weakens too far, cold doesn't just arrive, it spreads, not like a movie, like a chain reaction, moving through oceans, skies, and cities. And if those warnings are right, this may be how the next climate era begins. Beneath the Atlantic, there's a system most people never think about. A vast current carries warm water north, moving heat across the ocean like a hidden engine. That's one reason parts of Europe stay far milder than their latitude should allow. Then, in the far north, that water cools, grows denser, and begins to sink. So the cycle keeps turning. Warm water forward, cold water down, deep water back. It doesn't just move the sea, it helps shape weather, seasons, and the rhythm of climate itself. And that's why scientists are watching so closely, because this system may be losing strength. If the engine behind that balance starts to fail, the effects won't stay in the ocean. The warnings didn't begin with panic. They began with people noticing the pattern. More ice melting, more fresh water pouring into the North Atlantic. And that matters because this system depends on cold, salty water behaving a certain way. Change that balance and the engine doesn't stop all at once. It starts to lose rhythm. The flow weakens. The atmosphere begins to react. That's what makes this so dangerous. The signs can look small right until they start connecting. A strange season here, a colder coastline there, a signal buried inside the data. On their own, they look manageable. Together, they start to look like a warning. And climate systems don't always fail in a straight line. Sometimes they drift, then tip. Which means the real danger may not be the final collapse. It may be everything that begins before it. Because once a system like this crosses too far, getting it back is no longer simple. And that's the moment this stops sounding like science and starts feeling like a countdown. If the Atlantic system keeps weakening, Europe may be the first place to feel it hard. Not because the continent suddenly turns into ice overnight, but because the weather it depends on starts losing its old rhythm. Cold arrives earlier, storms linger longer, infrastructure begins to jam, trains slow down, roads clog, daily life turns heavier, harsher, less reliable. And the real danger isn't just the temperature, it's the pressure cold puts on everything built for stability. Power grids, heating systems, supply routes, food delivery. Fields can freeze harder, growing seasons can shift, harvests can become less predictable. Along the coast, rougher seas and harsher winters start pushing at the same weak points again and again. Homes still stand, cities still function, but less confidently than before. And that's how these systems become frightening, not all at once, but through repeated strain. What looks like bad winter weather can actually be a deeper climate pattern slipping out of place. And if that pattern keeps shifting, Europe won't be the last place to feel it. And once a system like this starts slipping, the damage doesn't stay local. Some regions get hit with harsher cold, others get heavier rain, rougher storms, or flooding that keeps returning. Then, food systems start feeling it. Fields become less predictable, harvests take harder hits, ports slow down, shipping routes turn riskier, delays spread outward. And when stability gets harder to trust, people start moving. Not because the whole planet freezes the same way, but because climate instability doesn't strike evenly. Some places grow colder, some grow wetter, some grow hotter, harsher, and less dependable. And modern economies don't need one giant collapse to suffer. They only need repeated disruption. That's when the ocean stops feeling distant, because a changing current can start redrawing everyday life. Food, transport, energy, migration, what looked separate starts locking together. And that may be the most frightening part. The world can still function while becoming less stable every year, which is when a climate crisis starts feeling less like weather and more like a civilizational stress test. So is this the start of the next ice age? Not exactly, not in the way people usually imagine it. Earth has fallen into colder ages before. That part is real. The planet can change more violently than civilizations expect. But this time, the danger isn't just ancient ice. It's what extreme instability does to a modern world built on precision. So maybe Ice Age isn't the perfect term, but a colder, harsher, less stable climate era? That's a much more serious possibility. Because the real threat isn't that every region freezes the same way. It's that the balance starts breaking everywhere in different ways at once. And for modern civilization, that kind of instability can be just as devastating as deep cold. Not because of one storm, not because of one winter, but because the strain keeps coming back. So no, this may not be a classic ice age, but it could be the beginning of something that feels just as brutal to us. A world that still looks familiar while becoming harder to predict, harder to trust, and harder to hold together. And if this is only the early stage, then the most frightening part may still be ahead. This is what makes it different from a disaster movie. Nothing has to explode for the danger to become real. The real threat is slower than that. It wears down the systems people trust to feel normal. The planet doesn't need to die. It only needs to stop behaving in the way our lives were built around. And that may be worse in one important way, because people can keep adapting right up until adaptation starts failing. Modern civilization is incredibly advanced, but it's also built on timing, predictability, and stable conditions. Repeated disruption attacks all three, not with drama, but with exhaustion. And when a threat arrives quietly, people often normalize it before they truly fear it. Which may be exactly why this kind of future is more believable and more dangerous than fiction. The most dangerous part of this story may be how quiet it looks at first, because we built modern life as if this balance would always be there. But if the Atlantic system keeps slipping, it won't just change the weather. It will start testing everything that depends on stability: cities, food, energy, transport, and trust itself. And the longer that shift stays gradual, the easier it is for people to mistake it for normal. Until one day, the effects feel obvious, and by then, many of them may already be underway. So this isn't just a warning about some distant century. It may be a warning about the world we're already entering. Because when the ocean changes the rules, no nation stays completely outside the consequences. Nature doesn't need permission to become less forgiving, and it doesn't care how prepared we feel. So maybe the next age won't begin with fire or impact, but with a balance we thought would never break.